I'm 31 years old, and last year I was trying to save as much money as possible. I had just changed jobs and was still dealing with debts and overdue rent. Because of that, I rented a room in a large house shared with 3 other people in a suburb of Pennsylvania. The house was old, with worn carpet, the smell of old wood, and a noisy heater. Nothing seemed scary, just kind of sad and cramped like many shared rental houses. Everyone had their own routine and we barely crossed paths, which I actually preferred. The owner didn't live there. He only stopped by occasionally to pick up mail and check on things. There was a room at the end of the hallway that was always locked. When I asked about it, they said it was empty, just a storage room, and that the key had been lost. I accepted the explanation because I was too tired to question it. But from the very first week, I noticed something. At night, that hallway never felt completely quiet. And on that specific night, when I was alone in the house, it became impossible to ignore. That Friday, the other tenants said they were traveling or sleeping elsewhere. I remember because the house went quiet early, with no TV noise, no doors opening and closing. I ate something quick, washed the dishes, and went to my room with my laptop. It was cold outside, that damp cold that creeps in through the edges of the windows. The heater made short clicking sounds, and the carpet seemed to hold onto the day's smell. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and lay down, trying to sleep early. I was just about to fall asleep when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Light footsteps, like someone barefoot or in socks, moving slowly toward the end of the hall. I waited to hear a bedroom door open or the front door, but I heard neither. The sound stopped right near the locked room, and then came a low click, like a doorknob being turned carefully. Right after that, I heard the door close again, slowly, without slamming. And I had that stupid feeling that I shouldn't be hearing any of that. I lay still in bed trying to convince myself it was just the house settling. Pipes, anything normal. Old houses do that, especially in the cold. But a few minutes later, I heard something that was harder to rationalize. The clear sound of running water. It was the shower. Not the distant sound of plumbing, but water hitting directly, with pressure coming from the bathroom that was exactly next to the locked room. I sat up in bed and listened, counting the time. It wasn't quick. It wasn't someone turning it on by mistake. It was like someone was calmly taking a shower in the middle of the night, in a house I was absolutely sure was empty except for me. I got up slowly and opened my bedroom door just enough to look down the hallway. The light was off, but I could see the outline of the doors. The door to the locked room was closed, as always, but the sound of water was clearly coming from there. I stood there for a few seconds, feeling the cold floor under my foot, with that almost childish fear of being seen. The shower shut off suddenly. It didn't fade out, it stopped sharply, like someone quickly turning off the valve. Right after that, I heard footsteps again, this time closer, moving back and forth inside that room. Then the sound stopped and the house became too quiet, like it was waiting for something. I went back to my room and locked the door, something I rarely did. I sat on the bed with my phone in my hand, trying to decide whether to call someone or whether it would sound too ridiculous. While I was thinking, I heard the locked room's door open again. This time the sound was clearer, wood creaking slowly. Then came the noise of something being dragged across the floor, short and heavy, like a mattress being pulled a few inches. My stomach twisted immediately. It was no longer just someone walking. It was someone moving things, occupying space, as if that house belonged to them. A few minutes later, I heard pages being turned. Paper. A dry, repeated sound, too specific to be mistaken for anything else. Someone was reading or writing. Every time I thought about leaving my room to check, my body simply wouldn't obey. I sat there, lights off, trying to breathe slowly. At some point, I heard footsteps in the hallway again, now heading toward my room. They stopped right in front of my door. There was no attempt to open it, no knock. Just the heavy silence of someone standing on the other side, far too close. I sat there staring at the door, trying to hear anything that would tell me the person had left. My ears actually started to hurt from the effort. After a while, that felt much longer than it probably was. The footsteps moved away. I heard the locked room's door close again, with the same care as before. A few minutes later, the toilet flushed, followed by the sink being used briefly. It was all far too routine for someone who supposedly didn't exist. That filled me with a mix of fear and anger, because it wasn't random noise. It was someone living there, using the house as if they were invisible to all of us. That's when I decided to call the police. I explained that I was alone in a shared house and that someone was using a room that was supposed to be empty. On the other end of the line, the dispatcher asked calm, almost mechanical questions. She asked if I had seen anyone, if there were clear signs of forced entry, if I was sure it wasn't another tenant. As I answered, I heard once again the locked room's door open and close. I told her that, but the response was that without seeing the person or a direct threat, they couldn't send a patrol at that moment. She suggested I lock my door and speak to the owner in the morning. I hung up with the clear feeling that even doing everything right, I was completely alone in that situation. After the call, I sat in the dark, my phone resting on my chest, listening to every creak of the house. I tried to convince myself that if that person wanted to hurt me, they would have already done it. It was a horrible thought, but it was the only one that calmed me a little. The problem was that shortly after I heard something new, the front door being unlocked. It wasn't a sudden noise. It was a key turning carefully, like someone who didn't want to wake anyone. The door opened and closed slowly. Footsteps crossed the living room and headed toward the hallway. They passed by my room without stopping this time. They went to the back of the house and then stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise because it meant that person knew exactly where they were, and where I was too. My phone clock read almost 3 in the morning when I finally worked up the courage to leave my room. I opened the door slowly, heart pounding, and went into the hallway. Everything looked normal at first glance. The locked room's door was closed as always, but when I got closer I noticed the lock looked different, scratched, as if it had been forced many times over a long period. I pressed my ear to the door and heard nothing inside. Even so, I caught that faint smell of a person, of a body, of something warm that didn't belong in an empty room. That was the moment I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep in that house again. I went back to my room, grabbed a backpack, and started throwing in whatever I could reach. Wallet, charger, documents, a change of clothes. My hands were shaking so much that I dropped the zipper on the floor twice. While I was doing that, I heard footsteps in the hallway again, this time slower, almost dragging. They stopped again in front of my door. There was no attempt to open it, just that presence standing there on the other side, as if listening to the same silence I was. I stayed completely still, holding my breath, fixed on the thought that any sound I made could change how all of this ended. After a few seconds, the footsteps moved away and went toward the front door. I heard the key turn once more, the door open and close. I waited a few more minutes before leaving my room. The house was empty, silent in a different way, without that feeling of someone moving outside my field of vision. I left there that same night and slept in my car, in the parking lot of a 24-hour supermarket. The next morning I came back with a friend and we finally managed to open the locked room. Inside there was a mattress on the floor, still warm, recent food leftovers, and a notebook open on a chair. The pages had notes detailing the times each resident slept, woke up, and left the house. My name was there with exact schedules. The police were called again, looked at everything, took notes, but in the end said that without identifying who the person was, there wasn't much they could do. I moved out that week. I never rented a room in a shared house again. Some things don't need violence to be dangerous. Story 2. I live alone on a cul-de-sac in a small town in Kansas, the kind where you hear the wind before you hear a car. I was 27 at the time and worked at a local office. Nothing glamorous, just a very repetitive and quiet life. My house was small with an attached garage and a low front porch. I liked the cul-de-sac because, in theory, almost no one passes through unless they live there. But for a while, something started happening that seemed too small for me to call danger, yet too big to ignore. Almost every night at the same time, an unfamiliar car would slowly enter the street, turn off its headlights before reaching my house, and stop right in front of it. It wasn't park and get out. It just stayed there. Engine running. Sometimes you could see that slight vibration from the exhaust in the cold, and after a few minutes it would leave. At first I tried to explain it with normal things. Someone lost, someone waiting for another person, someone on their phone. But the time was always similar, and it always stopped in the same spot, as if that section of curb were a marker. On the night I'm about to tell, I was already tired of it. I had spent the whole day trying to pretend it didn't bother me, but every time that hour approached, I found myself watching the clock and feeling my chest tighten before the car even appeared. It was cold, that dry cold that makes the air feel stiff, and the street was empty. No people walking, no dogs barking. I was in the living room with the TV turned low when I saw, through a gap in the curtain, the car's light enter the street and disappear quickly because it turned off the headlights before stopping. The vehicle's shadow stayed there right in front like a dark block. I felt anger more than fear because it felt like a test, like someone measuring how long I would tolerate staying quiet in my own house. I grabbed my phone and thought about calling the police, but then that stupid thought came. What will they ask? He's just parked there. So I did the worst possible thing. I decided to go outside and talk to the driver just once to put an end to it. I threw a coat over my pajamas, slipped on whatever sneakers I could find, and went out the front door before I could change my mind. The icy air hit my face, and I felt that heavy silence of a late-night residential street. The car was there, stopped, dark, with the windows barely reflecting the streetlight at the end of the road. I walked up to the curb, trying to look confident, but my heart was pounding too hard. I knocked on the driver's window with my knuckles. It wasn't a punch, it was a firm tap, the kind that says, "I know you're there." The window rolled down only a few inches. I couldn't really see the face, just a silhouette and a hand on the steering wheel. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, if he needed help or if he was lost. The answer came short and emotionless. He said he was waiting for someone. I told him that this street wasn't a through street and that he couldn't keep stopping there every night. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then slowly rolled the window up, turned on the headlights, and drove away without saying anything else. I stood there, feeling the cold creep up my legs with the strange sensation that I had crossed a line without knowing where it was. Over the next few days, the car didn't appear. The first night, I felt relief. The second, I found it strange. By the third, I started feeling nervous in a different way. The problem wasn't that he was there, it was that he wasn't. I spent the night waking up at every noise, checking the street through the window, trying to see if anything was out of place. I caught myself thinking that maybe I had solved everything, that maybe it had just been an annoying person and that was it. But that feeling of being watched didn't go away with the car. It just changed locations. On the fourth night, already late, I heard a sharp noise coming from the garage. It wasn't loud, but it was too close. Like metal touching metal, brief and controlled. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and slowly walked down the hallway, feeling the cold floor under my feet, trying to convince myself it could be anything. When I turned on the garage light, I saw something that made my legs feel weak. A dark car was parked inside, perfectly aligned, engine off. The garage door was unlocked. I stood at the entrance of the garage for a few seconds, trying to understand if it was real. The car occupied the space as if it had always belonged there, too close to my things, to the door that led directly into the house. The first thing I did was look at the floor, expecting to see tire marks, any recent trace. There was nothing obvious, just cold, clean concrete. I moved closer slowly, phone in hand, flashlight on, illuminating parts of the car. It was the same model that used to stop on the street, of that I was sure, even without remembering the license plate exactly. The windows were too dark to see inside. The driver's door was closed but unlocked. I tested the handle with 2 fingers and it gave way far too easily. The interior was clean, no strong smell, no visible personal items. The seat was still slightly warm, as if someone had gotten out moments before. That was what scared me the most, because it erased any doubt that this wasn't an old prank or a mistake. Someone had entered my garage and left minutes before I got there. I ran back into the house and called the police, my voice breaking. I explained that an unknown car was parked inside my garage and that the door was unlocked. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and wait. Meanwhile, I locked all the doors and sat on the living room floor, leaning against the couch, staring at the hallway that led to the garage. Every sound felt too loud. When the patrol car arrived, they walked around the vehicle, wrote down the plate, and said it wasn't reported stolen. There were no clear signs of forced entry, and no one was inside the car. One of the officers said it could be a mistake, someone who entered the wrong garage. I looked at him without knowing how to explain that it made no sense on a cul-de-sac, in an isolated house, in a closed garage. They towed the car and left, taking with them that familiar feeling that officially nothing had happened. I stayed awake all night. The car never appeared again. But to this day, when I park in the garage, I check twice to make sure it's empty before closing the door. Because someone at some point decided that that space could belong to them too. After the police left, the house went silent in a wrong way, as if the noise had been forcibly removed. I couldn't turn off the lights. I walked from room to room, checking doors, windows, the garage door, repeating the same path as if it would keep me alert. The feeling wasn't exactly fear of someone coming back right then. It was the certainty that someone had already been inside without any hurry. There was no mess, nothing out of place, which made everything worse. Whoever did it wasn't nervous, they were comfortable. Around 2 in the morning, I tried lying down on the couch, but every creak of the house made me sit up again. The heater turned on and off, the pipes made soft noises, and everything felt amplified. At one point, I heard a low sound coming from the garage like metal cooling. My entire body froze. I stayed there, silent, gripping my phone tightly, waiting to hear footsteps, breathing, anything that would confirm I wasn't alone. I didn't hear anything else. Even so, I couldn't relax. The idea that someone had entered, parked the car there, and left unseen wouldn't leave my mind. When morning came, I went to the garage again. The space was empty, clean, with no visible marks. If I hadn't seen the car there hours earlier, I could have believed I imagined everything. The door still worked normally with no signs of forced entry. That was what irritated me the most. There was no clear mistake to point to, nothing I could fix. I called the police again, asking if they had identified the owner of the car. They said the plate was registered in another Kansas city, a few hours away, and that the owner claimed not to know how the vehicle ended up in my garage. The case ended there, no crime, no suspect, no answer. In the days that followed, I tried to return to my routine. I changed the garage remote, installed a simple camera, and left an exterior light on all night. The car never appeared on the street again. No vehicle ever stopped in front of my house at that hour, and again, that didn't bring relief. It brought that feeling of a unilateral conclusion, as if someone had finished what they wanted and moved on. I began avoiding going out at night, paying closer attention to my rearview mirror, locking the garage door even during the day. Today, when I tell this story, people always ask if I ever found out who it was, if the police helped later, if there was a logical explanation. There wasn't. Officially, it was just a car in the wrong place. But I know the difference between a mistake and a warning. Someone watched me long enough to know my schedule, the street's routine, the exact moment to enter and leave without being seen. The police couldn't do anything because, on paper, nothing serious happened. But I never again managed to see my garage as a safe place. Because that night, someone showed me they could enter my house without asking permission and leave whenever they wanted. Story 3. I was spending my vacation alone in my apartment in Michigan because my family had traveled to visit relatives out of state. I decided to stay because I needed to save money, and also because I liked the idea of a few days of silence. The apartment was small, on the second floor of an old building near campus, the kind with long hallways and dim lighting. I had lived there for almost a year, so I knew the normal sounds of the place well. The heater turning on, someone going up the stairs, doors slamming at predictable times. That night, I had been alone since the beginning of the week. No visitors, no plans, just alternating between studying, gaming, and watching random things. The weather was cold, and I kept the windows closed all the time. Nothing about that day seemed out of the ordinary, at least not at first. It was already past 11 at night when my phone started vibrating on the kitchen table. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop on my legs and glanced over without much urgency, assuming it was some pointless notification. When I saw the screen, I thought the phone had glitched. The call was coming from my own number. It wasn't unknown or a strange contact. It was exactly my number, with my name saved. I actually laughed to myself, thinking it was some error from the carrier or an app. I ignored the call and went back to looking at the computer screen. A few seconds later, the phone rang again. Same thing, my number, my name. That laugh disappeared quickly, replaced by a discomfort I couldn't quite explain. The third time the phone rang, I was already staring straight at it as if the device might explain itself. The sound seemed louder than normal in that quiet apartment. I thought about answering just to end it, to prove to myself it was some stupid technical error. When I answered, I didn't say anything. I just listened. On the other end, there was silence at first, the electronic emptiness of an open call. Then I heard breathing. It was slow, steady, very close to the microphone. What made me freeze was realizing the rhythm matched mine at that moment. I inhaled slowly and I heard the same thing, maybe a second later. I held my breath and the breathing on the other end stopped too. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a recorded audio. It was a response. I hung up with a shaking hand and stood in the middle of the kitchen, trying to decide what to do. My first impulse was to laugh nervously and assume someone was pulling an extremely elaborate prank. But that made no sense. No one had access to my number like that, and no one knew I was alone. I walked through the apartment, checking doors and windows. Everything was locked. The building's hallway was silent, no footsteps, no voices. I went back inside and placed the phone on the table as if keeping it in sight would give me some control. A few minutes passed and I started to think it was over. Then the phone rang again. This time I didn't answer right away. I watched the screen light up, showing my own number again, vibrating on the table as if someone were insisting on the other end. The sound seemed to echo through the entire apartment. I thought about turning the phone off, but something stopped me. Part of me wanted to see how far it would go. When I answered, the silence didn't last as long. The breathing returned almost immediately, but now it sounded closer, as if the phone were pressed against someone's face. I took 2 steps back without realizing it, bumping into the counter. I took a deep breath on purpose, testing it. A second later, I heard the same inhale. My heart started pounding far too hard, and I felt that heat rising up my neck, the clear sign of panic setting in. I hung up again and placed the phone face down, as if not looking at it would make it stop. I walked into the living room, sat on the couch, and stared at the bedroom door and the small hallway that led to the bathroom. The apartment looked too normal. Nothing out of place, no strange shadows, no sounds besides the heater. Still, the feeling of being accompanied wouldn't go away. A few minutes later, the phone vibrated again. I didn't need to look to know who was calling. I grabbed the phone angrily and answered, already speaking, asking who it was and what they wanted. On the other end, the breathing continued, but this time it didn't mimic mine. It stayed steady while I spoke, as if listening closely. I hung up again and went straight to the apartment door, checking both locks, pulling hard enough to make my hand hurt. Everything was secure. I pressed my forehead against the cold wood for a few seconds, trying to organize my thoughts. It was too late to call a friend and too early for it to sound like an emergency to the police. Even I didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding unhinged. I went back to the kitchen and put the phone in my pocket, determined to ignore any further calls. That was when the phone rang again, muffled by the fabric of my pants vibrating against my leg. I stopped in the middle of the room. I answered without taking it out of my pocket. I didn't say anything. On the other end, I heard my own breathing again, but now there was another sound behind it. A low, almost imperceptible noise like fabric brushing against something, very similar to the sound of someone moving inside a confined space. That was when I started hearing small noises in the apartment that I would have ignored before. A light creak coming from the bedroom, then another from the bathroom. They weren't clear footsteps, but they weren't random structural noises either. It was like someone trying to move too slowly to be noticed. I stood there, phone still to my ear, listening to my duplicated breathing and those sounds alternating between rooms. My entire body was tense, and I realized I was breathing faster. On the other end of the line, the breathing followed. A second later, a low voice almost pressed against the microphone whispered exactly what I was doing at that moment. That I was standing in the middle of the kitchen, with the phone to my ear, too afraid to look behind me. The instant I heard that, my body reacted before my mind. I turned too fast, nearly slipping on the kitchen floor, and looked down the hallway. It was empty. The bathroom door was still closed, the bedroom door slightly open, the way I always left it. Even so, the certainty that someone was inside didn't fade. It wasn't a vague impression, it was a physical, heavy certainty, like when you walk into a room and know you're not alone before you see anyone. The call was still active. I didn't hang up. I stood there trying to hear anything that would reveal movement. On the other end of the line, the breathing continued, far too calm for someone nervous. Then I heard a sound that didn't come from the phone. A low creak, very faint, coming from the bedroom. The kind of noise a mattress makes when someone carefully shifts position. My stomach churned because that sound didn't come from the floor below or the building hallway. It came from inside my apartment. I started walking slowly toward the bedroom without hanging up the call. Each step felt too loud. The hallway light was off, but I could see the outlines of the furniture. When I got close to the door, I heard the breathing on the phone change slightly, as if whoever was on the other end was preparing to speak again. Before I entered the bedroom, the voice returned, still low, still close, describing something I hadn't said out loud. That I was about to push the door with my right hand, that my heart was beating too fast, and that I hadn't locked the bedroom window. That made me stop instantly. I never left the window unlocked, but when I glanced sideways, I saw the curtain move slightly as if someone had passed by it moments earlier. The call dropped on its own right after that, leaving a silence far too heavy to be normal. I didn't enter the bedroom. I took 2 steps back and felt my legs weaken as if my body had decided for me that that space was no longer safe. I stood in the hallway, hearing only the sound of my own blood in my ears. The bedroom curtain was still moving slightly, just a little, like when the air takes time to settle after someone passes close by. I thought about running out of the apartment, but the idea of crossing the building hallway like that, not knowing if someone would come out of the bedroom behind me, froze me in place. I grabbed the phone again, trying to call the police, but my hands were shaking so badly that I entered the code wrong twice. When I finally managed to dial, I stayed silent for a few seconds, trying to find words that made sense. Before I could explain anything, I heard a clear sound coming from inside the bedroom, the floor creaking, now without any care, as if someone had given up on being discreet. That's when I ran. I didn't grab anything besides my phone and wallet. I yanked the apartment door open and crossed the hallway, nearly tripping. I ran down the stairs 2 at a time, feeling the cold air hit my lungs when I pushed open the building door. I stood in the parking lot staring at my apartment windows, expecting to see a light turn on or someone appear. I saw nothing. When the police arrived minutes later, I tried to explain everything, but it sounded confusing even to me. They went upstairs with me and searched the entire apartment. They found no one. The bedroom window was unlocked, but there were no clear signs of forced entry. They said someone had probably tampered with it earlier, or that I had forgotten to lock it. The phone no longer showed any recent calls from my own number. Officially, nothing had happened. I didn't sleep again that night. The next day, I went back only to grab some clothes and spent the rest of the vacation at a friend's place. To this day, when my phone rings and the screen takes a second to light up, I feel that same tightness in my chest. Story 4. My wife and I had moved into that house in rural Tennessee not long before. Newlyweds, tight budget, the typical decision to accept something old because it was what we could afford. The house was bigger than we needed, with a backyard far too large for people who had come from an apartment. Tall trees, uneven grass, an old shed at the back. During the day, the place seemed just quiet. At night, the silence became different, heavy, as if the yard swallowed any sound that tried to escape from there. I worked early and she was still adjusting to the routine, so we went to bed early. There were no bars nearby, no movement. It was the kind of street where you immediately notice any unfamiliar car. In the first few days, everything seemed too normal for such an isolated place. It was only after the first week that I began to notice something that, at first, I thought was fatigue or suggestion from my own mind. That specific night, I woke up around 2 in the morning feeling thirsty. The house was completely dark, only the faint glow of the stove clock marking the time. As I walked toward the kitchen, I passed the glass door that led to the backyard. Out of reflex, I looked outside. That's when I saw the man. He was standing near the fence, always in the same spot that I would later realize lined up with our bedroom window. He wasn't moving. He made no gesture. It was just a dark silhouette, too straight to be a tree, too still to be an animal. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. I thought of a shadow, a trunk, anything but a person. I blinked, stepped closer to the glass, and he was still there, motionless, facing the house, as if he were looking directly at where I stood. I stood there in the kitchen, holding the glass of water without drinking, trying to decide if any of it made sense. The silhouette didn't move an inch. It didn't look like someone walking through the yard or someone lost. It was as if that person had chosen that exact spot to stand. The yard was large, with several places closer to the house, darker, more hidden. Even so, the man was always there in that specific spot, exposed enough to be seen if someone looked carefully. I took a step to the side, testing whether the angle would change. He remained aligned with the house. My first thought was to wake my wife, but something stopped me. I didn't want to scare her over something I didn't fully understand yet. I went back to the bedroom quietly, but it took a long time before I managed to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I had the sensation that someone was still watching the house, even though I couldn't see them. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same position. I was already expecting it, which is strange to admit. This time, I spent several minutes watching before doing anything. The man didn't move his arms, didn't shift his weight, didn't seem to tire. The only thing that changed was the feeling inside me, which grew heavier the longer I looked. I woke my wife carefully and asked her to look with me. She stayed silent for a few seconds, trying to focus in the dark. When she finally identified the silhouette, she squeezed my arm hard. She asked who it was, what he wanted, why he was there. I had no answers. We both stood there looking through the glass door, waiting for any movement that might explain it. None came. After a few minutes, we turned off the kitchen lights and went back to the bedroom, as if pretending we hadn't seen anything would make it disappear. On the third night, I was tense even before it got dark. We ate dinner almost without talking, and my wife noticed that I kept looking toward the yard every few minutes. Around 1:30 in the morning, I got up quietly and went to the glass door again. The silhouette was there, exactly in the same spot. The difference was that this time I had the clear impression that he was slightly closer to the house. Not much, maybe 1 or 2 steps forward, but enough to make me feel that something had changed. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and tried to see any detail of his face, his clothes, anything that would tell me it was just a strange neighbor. I saw nothing but the dark outline. No eye shine, no involuntary movement. Just that still, firm presence, as if the yard were a stage and he were rehearsing standing there. That was the night we decided to install motion-activated floodlights in the yard. Not out of courage, but out of exhaustion. The idea of continuing to pretend nothing was happening felt worse than trying to do something. I spent the next day installing the lights, adjusting the range, testing the motion sensors. I made sure to cover the entire yard, especially the spot where the man usually stood. When it got dark, we left all the interior lights off and stayed awake, sitting on the couch, waiting. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock. At exactly 2, the back floodlight suddenly turned on, bright, lighting up the entire yard. My heart raced. We looked together through the glass door. The yard was empty. No person, no silhouette, just illuminated grass and trees swaying slightly in the wind. At first, we felt relief. A strange, suspicious relief, but real. We watched the lit yard for several minutes, waiting for him to appear somewhere, angry at being exposed. Nothing happened. The lights turned off on their own after the programmed time, and the yard returned to a dark mass. I started to think that maybe that was the end. Maybe the man had realized he could now be seen and decided to leave. But a few minutes later, the floodlight turned on again. This time, I was looking directly when it happened. The light burst across the yard all at once, and for a fraction of a second I saw movement. Not enough to identify a full person, but enough to understand that someone had just stepped out of the light's range, as if he had retreated at the exact moment the sensor triggered. That became a pattern that same night. Whenever the floodlight turned on, the yard was empty. Whenever it turned off, I had the sensation that someone had returned to the same place as before. On one of the activations, I even saw the shadow of something moving backward. Too fast to be a large animal, too controlled to be something startled. My wife began to cry softly, sitting on the couch saying she didn't want to live there anymore. I tried to calm her, but the truth was that I didn't want to either. It became clear that the man hadn't gone away. He was just learning where he couldn't be seen. He moved closer every night, step by step, to the exact limit of the light, like someone who knew perfectly how far he could advance without being caught. Around 3 in the morning, I decided to observe without moving. I stood behind the living room curtain, my body partially hidden, trying not to cast a shadow on the glass. The yard was dark again. The air felt colder, more still. That's when I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The man wasn't standing in exactly the same spot by chance. He was always aligned with the side of the house where there was no direct floodlight, where the camera didn't clearly capture his face. It was as if he had studied the terrain before he ever started appearing. A few seconds later, The floodlight turned on again, and I clearly saw the silhouette step back just one step, remaining outside the reach of the light. It wasn't a flinch. It was a calculated movement. When the light turned off, I was certain he stepped forward again, even though I couldn't see him. My entire body reacted as if I were being watched from very close, even with the yard dark. My wife asked if we should call the police. I hesitated because I didn't know what to say. That there was a man standing in the yard, but he always stepped back before being seen by the cameras. That we had no clear image, no direct trespass. Still, we called. The dispatcher listened carefully, asked objective questions, requested a description. While I spoke, the floodlight turned on once more. The yard was empty. I told her that too. The response was that without someone visible at that moment, they couldn't act immediately. They suggested we stay inside and call again if the man approached the structure. I hung up with that familiar feeling of helplessness. Officially, nothing was happening. In practice, someone was there, choosing not to be seen. After the call, the house felt smaller. Not physically, but in the way the silence gathered in the corners. We both sat on the living room floor, leaning against the couch, without the courage to go to the bedroom. I watched the reflection of the yard in the glass door, trying to notice any minimal change. At a certain moment, I had the clear sensation that the silhouette was closer than ever, even without seeing it. It wasn't sight. It was instinct. The kind of certainty that makes the body react before the mind. The floodlight on the left side turned on, and I saw the shadow retreat too fast for someone surprised. It was a rehearsed retreat, almost automatic. When the light turned off, I felt that weight return, as if someone had come back to the exact same spot as before, waiting. That's when I realized something else. He never tried to enter, never touched the house, never came close enough to justify a clearer reaction. He stayed at that exact boundary between presence and absence, as if he wanted to be noticed but not confronted. That was what bothered me most. He wasn't a burglar, nor someone clearly lost. He was someone observing, measuring, testing. My wife whispered if he might be looking at the bedroom windows. I didn't answer because I didn't want to confirm something I already suspected. The bedroom was perfectly aligned with the spot where he usually stood. It was the only place in the house where, even with the floodlights, there was a constant shadow. Shortly before 4 in the morning, something changed again. The floodlight turned on, but this time it didn't turn off at the usual interval. It stayed on longer, illuminating the entire yard. A chill ran up my spine because that only happened when there was continuous movement within the sensor's range. We both stared, barely blinking. Then we saw it. Not the full body, not clearly, but enough to understand. The man was closer to the house than ever, standing exactly at the limit where the camera couldn't capture his face, but where the sensor still detected movement of his torso. He didn't step back this time. He stayed there, motionless, accepting the light. It was as if he had decided he no longer needed to hide completely. The silhouette seemed larger, more defined, and it was possible to tell that he was facing directly toward the glass door where we stood. My wife started shaking and gripped my hand tightly. I felt a strange anger mixed with fear, because that posture wasn't indecisive. It was comfortable. The floodlight finally turned off and the yard went dark again. But the feeling wasn't relief. It was waiting. As if that night wasn't over for him yet. A few seconds later, we heard a dull sound coming from the yard, like a foot stepping on something hard, very close to the house. It wasn't at the door. It wasn't at the window. It was close enough to make it clear that the distance was shrinking, and still there was no attempt to enter, just presence. I stood up slowly and pulled my wife with me, moving into the hallway without making noise. It wasn't a thought-out decision. It was pure instinct to get away from the exterior walls. We stood there near the bathroom, lights off, listening. From the yard, no clear sound came anymore, just that heavy silence that seemed to press against the ears. The floodlight didn't turn on again. What made me more nervous was realizing that for the first time since it started, I wasn't sure where he was. Before, even without seeing him, I knew the exact spot where he stood. Now, I didn't. The absence of reference was worse than the constant presence. It was as if he had finally changed the rules. A few minutes later, I heard a low sound coming from the side of the house. It wasn't a knock or a scratch. It was something touching and pulling away, like someone testing the distance between their body and the wall. My wife covered her mouth with her hand to keep from making noise. I felt my heart pounding so hard that I was afraid he could hear it. The sound repeated a second time, a little closer to the bedroom window. Still no attempt to open, no pressure. Just that insistent, calculated presence, as if the goal wasn't to enter, but to make it clear that he could get there whenever he wanted. That's when I understood that the fact that he never entered wasn't reassuring. It was part of the control. We stayed in that hallway for a long time without speaking, just listening. I began to notice sounds I would never have paid attention to before. The faint crack of cooling wood, the wind passing through the higher leaves, a distant creak from the shed at the back of the yard. Everything seemed amplified because I was trying to separate what was normal from what wasn't. At one point I heard clear footsteps on the grass. Not fast, not heavy. Spaced steps like someone deliberately walking slowly. They went back and forth along a short line, always close to the house, never moving out into the open yard. It was as if he were walking just enough to keep the sensor alert, testing how far he could go without triggering the light again. My wife began whispering that she wanted to leave, to go away that very night. But I knew that going out into the dark without knowing where he was could be worse. A few minutes later, the footsteps stopped again. The silence returned, thicker than before. The floodlight didn't turn on again. We stayed there until the sky began to lighten slightly, that cold blue before dawn. When we finally gathered the courage to look through the glass door, the yard was empty. No silhouette, no movement. The grass looked normal, without obvious marks near the house, which bothered me almost as much as if there had been footprints. There was no concrete proof that he had been there in that final part of the night. Only the physical certainty that he had come closer than ever and chosen to stop exactly where he couldn't be seen. That didn't feel like a mistake or chance, it felt like a choice. When day finally came, the house felt different. Natural light came through the windows and eased that oppressive feeling a little, but it didn't erase what had happened. We went out into the yard together carefully, observing every patch of grass. We didn't find clear footprints or obvious signs that someone had stood there for hours. But near the spot where the man usually stood, the grass was slightly flattened, as if someone had remained standing in the same place for a long time. It wasn't something you could photograph and prove, but it was visible if you were looking for it. I felt a knot in my stomach when I realized that spot was exactly outside the camera's direct range. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone had studied that yard better than we had. That same morning, we spoke with some neighbors. No one had seen anything. No one had heard anything. An elderly woman at the end of the street mentioned that she sometimes saw people walking through the field behind the houses, but never near the yards. The police were called again, now with the full account of the night, the lights, the cameras. They reviewed the footage and confirmed that there was constant movement, but always incomplete, always outside the frame. One of the officers said it looked like someone was playing with the sensor. Without trespassing, damage, or being caught in the act, there wasn't much they could do besides file a report. When they left, it became clear to me that officially that man didn't exist. But we both knew he had been there, choosing each step carefully. We didn't sleep the following night. Even with daylight, the idea that someone knew the exact boundary between being seen and not being seen wouldn't leave my mind. We spent the entire day locked inside the house, speaking softly without realizing it, as if the yard were still listening. At night, the floodlights stayed on the entire time, the cameras recording non-stop. Nothing happened. No silhouette, no suspicious movement. And once again, that didn't bring relief. It brought the feeling of a unilateral ending, as if he had decided he had gone far enough. 2 days later, we packed some clothes and went to stay with relatives for a while. We didn't tell anyone when we would return. When we finally came back weeks later, the yard was normal. No new marks, no sign of presence. But I could never again see that space as neutral. To this day, when I think about it, what bothers me most isn't the possibility of intrusion, it's the discipline, the patience. The fact that someone spent nights there standing still, watching, learning exactly how far they could go without being seen, without giving reason for a clear reaction. He never entered because he didn't need to. The threat was precisely in proving that he could get close whenever he wanted and retreat before being caught. The police couldn't help because technically nothing happened. But I know the difference between someone passing through a yard and someone choosing that place. And I know that for a time, that house was being watched from the outside with the same attention someone gives to something they intend to keep under control. Story 5. At that time, I was working 2 jobs and slept like a rock during the day. It was real exhaustion, not a figure of speech. I worked the night shift at a small hospital and early in the morning cleaned offices. I lived alone in an old 3-story building in Massachusetts near a train line. The apartment was small but cheap, with heavy wooden doors and old locks. I got home around 9 in the morning, ate whatever I could, and collapsed into bed. I didn't use an alarm clock, didn't hear noise, didn't dream. I slept too deeply to notice anything around me. Because of that, when I started noticing small changes in the apartment, I thought it was just fatigue. Things so mundane they felt like my mistake, not something external. A shoe out of place, a cabinet I didn't remember opening. Nothing screamed danger, only you're too tired. The first thing that really caught my attention was the food. Nothing disappeared all at once. It wasn't obvious theft. 1 less yogurt, bread running out faster than it should. I even thought I might be eating at night without remembering. That was how tired I was. Then came the windows. I had a habit of locking everything before sleeping. I always checked twice. Even so, I woke up on more than one occasion with a window unlocked. The building was old. The locks failed sometimes, so I justified it. But the strange feeling stayed, as if the apartment had been used while I wasn't awake, or worse, while I was sleeping. The changes became more specific as the days passed. It wasn't just something out of place, it was the feeling that someone had used the space in their own way. A glass in the sink I didn't remember using. The toilet seat up when I always left it down. A towel slightly damp even after hours with no one showering. I kept mental notes but always ended up thinking I was exaggerating. Working nights messes with your head. Sleeping during the day makes everything blurry. I repeated that like a mantra, because the alternative was admitting that someone might be entering my apartment without me noticing. And that seemed too absurd to be true. It was on a Tuesday morning that something changed for good. I woke up to the front door unlocked. Not open, unlocked. The old lock was stiff, made noise when turned, and I was sure I always locked it before lying down. I stood there for a few seconds, still groggy, staring at the doorknob. There were no signs of forced entry, no new marks on the wood, just the loose lock, as if it had been used normally. I closed the door, locked it, and stood leaning against it, feeling my heart race. For the first time, I clearly thought that maybe someone had a key, and that this person knew exactly what time I slept. That morning, I didn't go to my second job. It was the first time in months I'd missed work without notice. I sent a vague message saying I wasn't feeling well and turned off my phone. The idea came almost without planning it. Pretend to leave like always, but stay. I needed to be sure whether this was really happening or if my mind was playing a cruel trick on me. I showered quickly, got dressed as if I were leaving, and made a point of slamming the door like I always did. I went down the building stairs, waited a few seconds outside, then came back silently. I climbed slowly without turning on the hallway lights, smelling the old wood and dust. I entered the apartment carefully and locked the door from the inside. I turned off all the lights and hid in the bedroom, behind the door, my heart pounding. The apartment became completely silent, as if it were empty again. I stayed there for a long time, sitting on the cold floor, trying to control my breathing. My phone clock showed a little after 10 in the morning. That was exactly the time I was usually sleeping deeply. The building made its normal daytime sounds. Someone going down the stairs, a door slamming far away, the train passing in the distance. Everything seemed too normal to justify the fear I was feeling. For a few minutes I thought nothing would happen, that I had lost a morning of work to paranoia. That's when I heard the front door lock turn. It wasn't forced. It wasn't wrong. It was the right sound, at the right rhythm, of someone using a key that fit perfectly. The door opened slowly, without any hurry. I saw the shadow crossing the living room even before I heard clear footsteps. The man entered like someone who knew the place, closed the door carefully and turned the key back, leaving everything exactly as it had been before. He didn't call out, didn't hesitate, didn't look around searching for anything. He took off his coat and hung it on the kitchen chair, the same chair where I usually left my bag. The sound of the fabric hitting the backrest seemed too loud in that silence. I stayed completely still behind the bedroom door, my hands sweating and my mouth dry, trying not to make any noise. My whole body screamed to run, but my mind said that any movement would give away where I was. He began moving through the apartment naturally. He opened the fridge, took something, and closed it again. I heard packaging being opened, slow chewing, like someone taking a break in the middle of their routine. Then he went to the bathroom. The toilet flushed, the faucet turned on and off, the towel pulled from its place. Every sound was too familiar, used the right way, at the right time. It wasn't someone exploring a new space. It was someone using it. At one point, he passed near the bedroom door. I saw his feet through the gap underneath, stopped for a second longer than necessary. I held my breath so hard I started to feel dizzy. He moved on, as if he knew exactly that I wouldn't make a sound. He went to the living room and sat on the couch exactly in my usual spot. I heard the upholstery give way in that familiar way, that low creak I recognized. The TV remote clicked, but he didn't turn anything on. He just sat there in silence for a time that felt far too long. I could hear his breathing, calm, steady, like someone resting. At some point, he stood up and started walking through the apartment again, opening drawers carefully, closing them the same way. Nothing was rummaged through. Nothing was taken in a rush. It was as if he were checking that everything was still where it should be. When he entered the bedroom, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. He didn't turn on the light. He walked a few steps, stopped near the bed, and stood there. I was behind the door just a few feet away, smelling the faint scent of his coat mixed with the stale bedroom air. After a few seconds, he adjusted the bedspread, folding the edge the way I always did before sleeping. That detail shook me the most. It wasn't curiosity. It was habit. He ran his hand over the pillow like someone checking if something was comfortable, and then left the bedroom. I felt tears running down without realizing it, trying not to make any sound. When I heard the front door open and close again, I waited several more minutes before moving. I came out of the bedroom slowly, my legs weak. The apartment was exactly as he had found it, maybe even more organized. The kitchen chair was in place, the towel hanging correctly, the bed neatly made. Only then did I notice something on the table. An old key, different from mine, left there without explanation, like a reminder that he could come back whenever he wanted. I stared at that key for far too long, trying to understand whether it had been carelessness or a message. It didn't look modern, nor like the common copies made today. It was heavy, with a worn tip, as if it had been used for many years. I picked it up carefully and felt a strange chill just from touching it. My mind began connecting dots I had avoided until then. The building was old. The locks had never been changed since I moved in, and the landlord always said that old keys were still out there somewhere. That stopped sounding like an irrelevant comment and started sounding like a warning I had ignored. I realized that the man hadn't broken in. He had simply entered, the same way someone comes home after work. I called the police in a low voice, almost whispering, even though I was alone. I explained everything as calmly as I could. The changes, the unlocked door, the man entering with a key. They listened, asked questions, requested a description. When a patrol car arrived, I was still shaking. The officers looked through the entire apartment, took notes, photographed the key. They asked if I had clearly seen his face. I said no. They asked if anything had been stolen. I said no. One of them commented that technically, without forced entry or a direct threat, it would be difficult to pursue. They suggested changing the lock, talking to the landlord, filing a report. They said it in a tone of someone who already knew there would be no immediate resolution. When they left, the apartment felt even more vulnerable, as if the silence had returned with more room to spread. After the police left, I sat on the living room floor, leaning against the couch, looking at the apartment as if seeing everything for the first time. Every object now felt loaded with another intention. The couch was no longer just where I rested. It was where someone had sat comfortably. The kitchen was no longer just where I ate quickly before sleeping. It was where someone had taken a calm break in the middle of the day. I went from room to room checking everything again, even knowing I wouldn't find anything obvious. The problem wasn't what was out of place, it was what was exactly in the right place. Someone had been there without leaving a mess because they didn't need to. Someone who wasn't in a hurry. I changed the lock that same afternoon with the help of a neighbor, but the feeling of exposure didn't leave along with the old key. That night I tried to sleep, but my body simply wouldn't shut down. Any sound in the building made me sit up in bed. I spent the night awake, staring at the bedroom door, waiting to hear the lock turn again. I didn't hear anything, and once again that didn't bring relief. It brought the certainty that he didn't need to come back right away. He had already shown that he could enter whenever he wanted. In the days that followed, I requested a shift transfer, stayed away from the apartment for a few days, slept at a friend's place. The landlord said he'd never heard of anyone using an old key, but he didn't seem truly surprised. As if it were just another inconvenient detail of a building that was too old. I ended up moving out of that apartment a few months later, when I managed to save enough money for another place. I didn't tell this story to many people at the time because it was hard to explain without sounding exaggerated. There had been no break-in, no direct threat, no confrontation, just the certainty that someone had used my space while I slept deeply, trusting that I wouldn't wake up. Sometimes I think that the scariest part wasn't discovering the man, but realizing how much my predictable routine had made everything easier. Fixed schedules, heavy sleep, no visitors. I wasn't chosen at random. I was convenient. Even after changing the lock, I never managed to sleep the same way in that place. My body always seemed to be waiting for something. Today, when I remember that morning hiding in the bedroom and hearing the key turn, the sensation is still physical. It wasn't immediate panic, no screaming, no running. It was the slow realization that safety isn't just a locked door, but control of access. The police couldn't help because, officially, nothing serious had happened. No clear crime, no identified suspect. But I know the difference between living alone and sharing a space without consent. Someone entered, used my home, left calmly, and left a key as silent proof that it hadn't been a mistake. Since then, I've never underestimated small changes. Shoes out of place aren't just distraction. Sometimes they're a warning. Story 6. I had separated and moved to a quiet condominium in Florida because I just wanted peace. I was 34 years old, worked remotely, and my head was already full enough. The building wasn't luxurious, but it was well kept. Clean hallways, discreet neighbors. It was the kind of place where you hear the elevator going up and know someone has arrived. My apartment was on the second floor, and downstairs lived a guy I only knew from saying, "Hi." He seemed normal. T-shirt, flip-flops, quick smile, short elevator conversations. I wasn't friends with anyone there, which was exactly what I wanted at that time. I spent many weekends alone, watching TV, making simple food, going to bed early. That's when I started noticing a pattern that made me uncomfortable little by little, without exploding all at once. Whenever I was alone at home, the downstairs neighbor would start to show up in some way. He'd bang on the ceiling, as if I were making noise even when I was sitting still on the couch. Then he'd ring the doorbell and come up with some casual excuse as if it were a coincidence. On the night I'm about to describe, I was already fed up and also a bit embarrassed to admit how much it was affecting me. I was alone again, because my ex had kept the dog and I still hadn't brought anything in to make the place feel alive. It was Friday, lightly raining, that constant sound of water in the parking lot, and the air conditioning made the apartment cold. I had ordered a pizza and was eating at the table, the TV low, trying to relax. Around 10:30, there was the first bang on the ceiling, loud, twice in a row. I stopped chewing and stared at the floor as if I could see the guy through it. There was no music, no footsteps from me, nothing that justified a complaint. I ignored it, because I'd already learned that responding only fed it. 5 minutes later, my doorbell rang, once, then again, more insistently. I looked through the peephole and saw him there, very close to the door, with a smile that didn't match the hour. He raised his hand like he was saying, "Just a second," and I felt a physical discomfort in my stomach. I didn't open the door. I stayed quiet, and he didn't leave quickly like a normal person would. I stood behind the door, not making a sound, trying to hear what he'd do. Normally, when someone rings and isn't answered, they leave in a few seconds. He didn't. Through the peephole, I saw his body remain there very close to the door, as if he were listening to something inside. The smile was gone. He was serious, head slightly tilted forward. About 20, maybe 30 seconds passed, and I started counting my breath so I wouldn't move. Then he gave 2 light taps on the door, not the doorbell, but with his knuckles, very slowly. It wasn't urgency. It was testing. After that, he went down the stairs without saying anything. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps in the ground floor hallway and the building's door opening. I waited a bit longer before moving away from the door, with that bad feeling that he knew exactly that I was there, silent, on the other side. That's when I decided to install the indoor camera I'd bought months earlier and never used. It was one of those simple Wi-Fi ones that point at the door. I put it on a low shelf, adjusted the angle to catch the hallway when the door opened, and left it connected to my phone. I didn't do it thinking I'd catch something criminal. I did it because I needed to confirm whether I was exaggerating or not. I went back to the kitchen table trying to act normal, but my body wouldn't relax. Less than half an hour later, I heard footsteps climbing the stairs again. The doorbell didn't ring this time. My phone vibrated with the camera notification, and when I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. He was standing in the hallway, exactly in front of my door, motionless, his face just inches from the wood. He wasn't knocking, wasn't calling out. He was just there, listening, as if he were waiting to hear something that confirmed I was alone. I stared at the phone screen trying to understand how long he'd stay there. A minute passed, then another. He didn't touch his phone, didn't look around. His posture was that of someone focused on a very specific sound. At some point, he gently pressed his ear against the door, as if he didn't want to make noise even for himself. My heart started pounding so hard that I was afraid the camera's microphone might somehow pick up a vibration, even though I knew that was irrational. That's when I heard the building's elevator go up. The metallic sound echoed through the hallway. On the screen, I saw the neighbor react immediately. He stepped back from the door, straightened his posture, and turned his face to the side, adopting a neutral expression. As soon as another resident got out of the elevator and walked down the hallway, the neighbor gave a casual wave, said something I couldn't hear, and headed toward the stairs as if he were just passing through. The naturalness of the change scared me more than if he'd run. A few minutes later, the elevator went down again and the hallway was empty. I stayed frozen inside the apartment, phone in hand, trying to decide what that meant. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't an annoying neighbor. He only showed up when I was alone, and only stayed when he was sure no one else was around. I started remembering other nights, other ceiling bangs, other casual visits that always coincided with my weekends without company. Everything clicked together in a way that made me nauseous. I realized he wasn't trying to talk. He was checking. Verifying presence, measuring silence. And that camera had shown me something I couldn't unsee. He didn't come to my door to talk to me. He came to listen to see if there was anyone with me. I turned off the TV and stayed in absolute silence, as if it were an involuntary experiment. I turned off the living room light and sat on the couch, trying not to make any sound that would give away movement. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps climbing the stairs again. The phone vibrated almost at the same time. When I opened the camera, there he was again, standing in the same exact spot in the hallway. This time, he didn't ring the doorbell or bang on the ceiling first. He went straight to the door. He stood there motionless as if counting time. The feeling was that he was waiting to hear something that confirmed I was alone. A step, a sigh, the creak of the couch. I realized my own breathing sounded too loud in that silence. He placed his hand on the door for a second, didn't turn the knob, didn't try to open it. He just left his hand there as if feeling the surface, then pulled it away. That gave me a physical shiver because there was no attempt at invasion, only contact. As if he were marking territory, the elevator didn't go up this time. No other resident appeared to interrupt. Even so, after a while, he stepped away and went down the stairs slowly. I watched the screen until the hallway was empty again. My body took a long time to react. When I finally stood up, my legs were weak, as if I'd been standing for hours. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't know how to explain what had happened without sounding exaggerated. A neighbor stood listening at my door. Didn't sound like something that would get a patrol car. Still, that feeling of surveillance wouldn't go away. He didn't need to enter, he just needed to know. Know when I was alone. Know when no one would show up to interrupt. That was enough to turn my apartment into an unstable, unpredictable place where silence had started working against me. That night, I slept with my phone in my hand and the camera open, waking up at every minimal noise in the building. Any pipe knock or distant door made me hold my breath. At some point in the early morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway again, lighter, almost careful. I looked at the screen immediately. He was there once more, but now a little farther from the door, as if he'd learned something from previous visits. There was no knock, no doorbell, no ceiling bang. He just stood there, staring at my door for long seconds. His posture was far too relaxed for someone with a legitimate reason. He looked like someone waiting for a confirmation that wasn't coming. Then, as if he'd decided that night wouldn't yield anything, he turned and left. The hallway was empty, but the sense of presence remained, as if the entire building were paying attention to my movements. The next day, I ran into a neighbor from the floor above in the elevator and deliberately made conversation, speaking loudly about having visitors, about having spent the night with people at home, even though it wasn't true. I watched the building's reaction as if the walls could respond. That night there were no ceiling bangs, no one rang the doorbell. The camera showed the hallway empty the entire time. That's when I understood the pattern clearly enough to make me nauseous. He wasn't curious. He was hunting for opportunity. I started changing my routine, leaving lights on, turning the TV on even when I wasn't watching, inviting friends to stay over without telling anyone. It worked, but the price was high. To this day, when I'm alone for more than one night, I can't ignore the idea that someone might be listening on the other side of the door, waiting for the right silence to get closer. And that's something that never left me from that apartment. A few weeks later, I realized that living like that wasn't sustainable. I was always acting, always staging a presence that didn't always exist. I left dishes in the sink, towels in the bathroom, 2 glasses on the table, everything to make it look like I wasn't alone. Even so, on quieter nights, I still felt that strange weight in the hallway, as if the absence of noise were information in itself. There was one specific night when I got home later than usual and forgot to turn on the TV. I was too tired. I sat on the couch in the dark for a few minutes before going to bed. It didn't take long to hear the elevator stop on my floor. My stomach dropped before I even opened the camera. When I looked, he was there again, standing exactly in front of my door. He didn't knock, didn't ring, didn't do anything. He stayed there long enough for me to be sure he knew I'd forgotten to pretend. Then he stepped away calmly, like someone mentally noting a piece of information to use later. It was that early morning when I decided to leave. Not the next day, not when it was convenient, right then. I grabbed a backpack, threw in some clothes, a charger, documents, and left the apartment without making noise. I went down the stairs, heart racing, expecting to find him on some landing, but the building was empty. I drove to a friend's house and vaguely explained that I couldn't handle being alone. I didn't tell everything. It sounded too absurd out loud. In the following days, I returned to the condominium only during the day, always accompanied to get the rest of my things. I never saw the neighbor in person again. But one last thing stayed with me. On the last day, walking down the hallway with my friend, I saw the door to his apartment slightly open for a second. Inside, leaning against the wall, was a pair of shoes facing outward, positioned as if someone were ready to leave quickly. In that instant, I was sure that leaving had been the only correct decision I could have made. After I moved, I tried to rationalize everything. I thought about loneliness, coincidences, paranoia fed by a difficult period in my life. But none of those explanations held up when I remembered the precision with which he appeared. It was never random, never during the day, never when there was someone else with me. It was always when the building became too quiet, when my routine made it clear that I was vulnerable. The camera didn't show a bored neighbor. It showed someone testing limits, assessing risk, retreating only when there were witnesses. I even considered reporting it. But what would I say? That a man stood listening at doors? That he left when someone appeared? There was no clear crime, only intent. And intent, I learned, is rarely enough for someone to intervene in time. Today I live somewhere else, in another state. I still use cameras, still leave lights on, Still feel uncomfortable with silent hallways. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night convinced I heard footsteps outside, even knowing it's impossible. What scares me most isn't thinking about what he could have done, but how patient he was in not doing it. He didn't need to enter. He just needed to wait for the right moment. And the fact that I never knew what that moment would be is what makes this story impossible to forget. I'm writing this here because if someone is going through something similar, trust that discomfort. Not every danger makes noise. Some just listen.
I'm really grateful for staying until the last minute. It's always good to know that you're here, listening to every detail. If you liked it, comment which part was the scariest for you. And of course, sign up to keep listening to stories as dark as this one. See you in the next video.